Hello everyone, welcome to the final section of Module 4 on naming any compound. A couple of things that are important here, the learning objectives for this section. Correctly name molecular compounds and acids given their formulas or vice versa, and determine the type of compound and then correctly name it for any type of ionic, molecular, or acidic compounds. So last time we introduced the idea of naming ionic compounds. That is usually the more difficult naming system. So we will be introducing two more today, and then we'll talk kind of in general how we deal with the case where we have all four as a possibility. Okay, so a little bit about naming ionic compounds. When we name, naming molecular compounds. When we name a molecular compound, we use a prefix to indicate how many we have of each of the atoms, or each of the elements in the compound. We only use the prefix on the first element if it is not a 1. So for example, we don't say, for example, for carbon dioxide, we don't say mono carbon dioxide, we just say carbon dioxide. So it's pretty straightforward. You just have a prefix for the first one if it's not just one element, and then you have a prefix for the second one, whether it's 1 or 2, and then you change the ending to IDE as we had done before. The prefixes are listed here, so up to 10. So 1 is mono, 2 is di, 3 is tri, 4 is tetra, 5 is penta, 6 is hexa, 7 is hepta, 8 is octa, 9 is nona, and 10 is deca. Again, pretty straightforward. The big thing to remember here is only use it for molecular compounds. Molecular compounds are always going to have just nonmetals present. Okay, naming an acid. How do we name acids? First of all, how do we know when we have an acid? You can recognize a substance as being an acid when its chemical formula has a hydrogen as the first element in the formula. So that's how we would know when we have an acid. So for acids, we have two possibilities. We have what we call a binary acid. Binary acids contain only two elements. One of them is hydrogen, so hydrogen and one other thing would be a binary acid. And then we have what are called the oxyacids. These will contain oxygen, so we'll have many more, so more than two elements present with an oxyacid. So for a binary acid, the naming convention is fairly straightforward. We have the word hydro as a prefix, the name of the nonmetal, and then we have the ic ending, and then the word acid. So an example would be HCl would be hydrochloric acid. Okay, so that is a binary acid. Okay, for the oxyacids, these contain oxygen. The name of the oxyacids is related to the name of the polyatomic ions which they are derived from. So if you look at the polyatomic ions, you can look at the ending of the polyatomic ions. So some of them end with ITE, some of them end with ATE. If they end with ITE, we use this naming system. If they end with ATE, we use this naming system. So something ending with ITE, you would have the base name and end it with us, and then have the word acid. So for example, if you had nitrite, you would have nitrous acid. For a polyatomic ion ending in ATE, we would instead have the ending of ic acid. So if you had nitrate, you would then have nitric acid. So to use this system, you have to be familiar with the polyatomic ions. So be able to look at your list of polyatomic ions, identify the number of oxygens to figure out the correct ending, and then from there come up with the correct acid. Okay, now I want to talk about very generally. So for naming any compound, any inorganic compound that we've looked at so far. So this is a flowchart showing all of the possibilities, and we're not going to go through all of the details here. We've looked at all of these details already. What I want to do is I want to help you decide how to use this. So when you are naming a compound, the very first thing you should do is you should make a decision. You should pick between these three possibilities. Is it ionic? Is it molecular? Is it an acid? So that's the first thing you're going to do. Make that decision. Once you have made that decision, then you name it the correct way. So you name it according to which of these three you've done. And we've done these three already, so you should be able to be able to do that. So a little bit about how we do this. Again, just a reminder, for ionic compounds, you will often have a metal and non-metal. Okay, so these are based on charge balances. So go back and remember how we named ionic compounds, metal and non-metal. This is the most kind of the most tedious process. There's a lot of I shouldn't say a lot. There's a bit of math involved here, where there's not really math involved with the others. So just remember, you have to go through this process if it is an ionic compound. You name it as a molecular compound if everything in the compound is a non-metal. So if that's the case, you just use the system where you use prefixes. You name it as an acid if the first element in the formula is a hydrogen. If the first element is a hydrogen, then you would use this system. Okay, so this is how we go about making the decision of which of these three we should use. Okay, so that is the end of this section. A couple of things I want to say here. So again, make sure to ask questions on the discussion board, and make sure to find a way to post something on the discussion board if you have not done so yet, and then you can start the online homework. One other thing I wanted to mention regarding this last section, you'll notice there is not a specific worksheet for this. We are going to be spending more time on this during lab this coming week. We have an activity on naming compounds, and that is our lab activity this week. So you got a little bit of practice with some of these ideas earlier in the week, and then the lab this week is essentially what you would be doing for this worksheet, and it will be live. I'll be there. I'll be helping you out as you go through this. So that is not something you need to do ahead of time. We'll spend time on that in lab. Some of you might be thinking, well, what about the quiz? Will that affect how I will do on the quiz? For the quiz this week, there will not be any questions on the nomenclature. The quiz will go up to, so the quiz could include some of the material that we covered the previous week when we didn't have a quiz, so that could be on there. And then it will go up to just before we get into naming things. So you could have questions related to categorizing compounds or finding the formula of an ionic compound, but nothing on the nomenclature. So the last two sections of this module will not be on this quiz, but they will be on the following week's quiz. So you don't have to do that. However, if you would like to ask questions related to this material before lab this week, that would still be fine.